What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I'm going to show you how bass move in the late summertime of the year on three different types of bodies of water. First, a Highland reservoir, second, a shallow river system type lake, and third, a very flat, natural looking lake. I'm using contour maps to break all of this down, so let's get into it. As far as the late summer period, I'm talking August, September, maybe even early October, depending on how the season plays out in the year. And usually what you'll find is that in the summertime, the majority of your bass on a highland reservoir like Table Rock, for example, are going to be more towards the main part of the lake near the main river channel. A few places I've found bass in the past on Table Rock in, let's say, July and even early August are going to be on some of these main lake points that have a sharp drop off into the channel. They'll be 20 to 30 feet on top and then drop into 150 to 200 feet of water in some places. They'll be setting up on top of these points, as well as these longer points that stick out here. Another point that we can see right here that, again, is shallow on top and quickly drops into the channel. While these spots will have a lot of fish, again, in June, July, and August, they start to become less effective, and a lot of fish are going to start migrating away from these areas and moving further back into the creeks. When this happens, there are a few places these fish will set up. First is actually in shallower water, around shallow boat docks and other types of shallow cover. In a lot of these pockets in here, you can't see it on this mapping, but there are a lot of boat docks that are in, let's say, 5 to 10 feet of water in these flat pockets. And what these fish will do is actually swim from these main lake points down these banks and get in and around a lot of these boat docks in these pockets. Surprisingly, you'll find a lot of shad and brim in these areas, and what you can do is actually go into one of these pockets and look around the boat docks for small fry and small bluegill. If you see a lot of fry activity, small shad, things like that around the boat docks, there's a very high likelihood there's going to be bass in the area. And you really won't see a lot of those smaller bait fish setting up on these pockets until, let's say, the end of August into September and especially in October. Now, these fish will continue to move down these banks and set up a lot of times on these shorter, flatter pockets. And I've actually caught a lot of really nice, like 3 to 5 pound largemouth in September and October on these short pockets that I'm showing right now on Table Rock around boat docks, and also just in the morning throwing a topwater bait like a whopper plopper. Now, in addition to finding fish up shallow in these areas, you can also find them sitting out deeper. Because this creek here has anywhere from, like, let's say 2.5 to 5 feet of visibility at different times of the year and different years, you'll find fish both up shallow and offshore. I've actually found a lot of fish setting up on some of these longer, flatter secondary points suspended around timber, brush piles, and rock piles. And while you won't find a ton of fish as far as like a school of 100 or 200 fish, you can find small wolf packs of 3 to 5 bass setting up in trees, brush piles, and rock piles. For those non-forward facing sonar anglers, you can try to find rock piles in that, let's say, 15 to even 40 foot of water range and drag a jig or work a swim bait in those areas, as well as just kind of fan casting these points with top waters in the morning and swim baits later in the afternoon to try to catch some fish that are randomly roaming. Now, for anglers with forward-facing sonar, you can get in onto these really long flat points and actually scope around and find fish suspended in these trees in different areas. And it's a great 1-2 punch because I find a lot of times you can get some pretty good quality largemouth and smallmouth and spotted bass on lakes like Table Rock offshore in these areas, but also some really good largemouth just in these pockets that are flatter and a little bit shallower around the boat docks. So you can kind of hop between the two. Usually you only get maybe 5 to 10 bites a day on the boat docks, where you might get 30 bites a day on these points. But the fish on the points are going to be smaller, fish on the boat docks are going to be larger, so you kind of have to play it by ear. I usually don't make my way all the way to the backs of these creeks until it gets into like October, November time, like late October, early November, into December even. So I normally focus on this first half of the creek during this August period through, like, let's say the first couple weeks of October. But usually these fish will start that migration as soon as it kind of starts to cool down a little bit. There actually are times when it's still a little bit warm outside where it'll cool down for a bit, then warm back up. And we just had that happen recently here in Arkansas. So these fish may already be starting this migration. So it's definitely something to check out. Now, as far as, Table Rock, it's a super large reservoir, and so finding which creeks are the most productive can be a challenge, but usually most creeks are going to have this happening, and not all lakes look like this. That's why we're actually going to go over here to a different lake, which is going to be Lake Hudson over in Oklahoma. Now, Lake Hudson's very different from Table Rock in the sense that it's more of a river system type lake. It has a lot of just like river arms and things like that. And it also has a lot more dirty water, let's say 6 inches to 1.5 feet of visibility. Now, as far as the fish on these types of lakes, there's kind of actually 2 different scenarios. One, you're going to find there's going to be fish that set differently on like the lower end of these river type lakes where it's more spread apart. And a few of the places I find I have a lot of success are actually places that are relatively close to the main river channel but have short pockets close by. So these short little pockets here can be very, very effective, and you can find fish they're setting up on the flats right in here in front of that main channel, basically right next to it, but not all the way back in these pockets. So these flat areas, wherever you can find isolated laydowns or isolated rock piles. These are going to be in, let's say, again, 2 to 4 foot of water, not very deep, and I'll throw topwaters and crankbaits down these flat banks, putting my boat in maybe 5 to 8 feet of water, and sometimes just fishing down the bank with a topwater, or graphing them beforehand with side imaging to try to find some fish and some bait fish, some rock piles, brush piles, things like that I can target specifically with waypoints. I'll kind of go to all of these short little pockets and find fish a lot of times on all these little flatter banks in here, even on some of these points, but they're usually going to be at the mouth of the pockets, especially in like this August time, and then slowly make their way further in when you get into that September and October time, later setting up on these like secondary points and things, but all kind of around this main channel. I don't find as many fish on the opposite sides of the lake over here where they have to go a long way from that channel. You can get bit in these areas for sure, but the numbers are definitely not there. As you move further up the lakes, there's still areas like this is an area I catch a lot of fish right in through here, where again that main channel's here and another channel right here, and there's just these flat banks through here, and these fish will set up on isolated laydowns, isolated rock piles, things like that. And I'll kind of focus more towards these shorter pockets in general rather than the really big pockets, because I just feel like they're easier to cover on these river system lakes, especially because you have to idle a lot of places around here because there's so much debris in the water and random laydowns and things, so it's kind of sketchy to run. Now, as you work your way further up the river, though, you're going to get more towards these narrower stretches where there's just little islands and small creeks and things. And when you get into this situation, you're in that more river-esque type water, and there's 2 things you really need to look for in that August through October time. The first, you want to be looking at the points of islands. The points of these islands are going to be flatter and a lot of times even have like little saddles like this where there's going to be isolated laydowns and maybe small little rock outcroppings, maybe even jetties if you're on a very like river-esque lake where you actually have rock jetties. And you'll want to run the points of these islands in any of the jetties you see. One thing I've found about fishing these river system deals is that these fish won't migrate necessarily as much into the creeks like you see this big creek here. Instead, they're going to migrate up and down the river channel itself. So you're going to find that maybe in September, there's going to be a lot of fish in this section of the river. Then end of September, this section of the river is going to be better. And then into October, maybe this section is better. And you'll see that the shad will all basically migrate in this 1 or 2 mile stretch throughout the fall, and you're going to find one stretch that's better than the rest. And I basically will make my way all the way through this river until I start seeing more shad and get more bites. I move quickly, throwing spinner baits, crankbaits, and jigs, and just try to cover as much water up these rivers. And it can get really fun if you find the right stretch, but you can also have a really tough time if you spend too much time in 1 or 2 mile stretch of the river where it's not happening. If you're not getting bit very quickly on a spot, like let's say you pull up, make 15 casts and aren't getting bit, run 100, 200 yards up the river, check another spot, 15 casts, check another spot, 15 casts, and just find stuff that looks interesting. Maybe like little run-ins. You can see there's little creeks that show here where a little creek runs into one of these deals. Points are obviously good, and then obviously any little jetties or things. Even these like transition areas where the contour lines are really tight together and start to spread apart, those can be very effective as well. So that's your river system type lakes like Lake Hudson here in Oklahoma. Last but not least, let's take a look at Lake Spavinaw. This is more of a natural-ish type lake, or close as we can get in Oklahoma. And I'm trying to focus on lakes that I have experience fishing on in October, so I'm not going to go show you lakes in like Wisconsin or something I haven't fished in October because that just wouldn't be helpful. But Areas like this on Lake Spavinaw set up very similar to your natural type lakes, even some Florida type lakes, where there's not really defined creek channels or anything. It's just a big flat bowl, basically. Though there are small indentations and small drains and things that you can kind of see, like right in here, which you can find on pretty much all natural lakes, where there's just a little bit deeper water, maybe right here, but nothing crazy. Now, in this situation, what I find is that in kind of this July, August period before you get into this transition time, a lot of these fish will be setting up more in this deeper area. Let's say in that like 7 to 11 feet, maybe even 5 to 11 feet of water. On Lake Spavinaw, there's offshore grass out through here. So you have offshore grass that basically is in this entire area. And usually in July and August, you're trying to find the outside edge of that grass where there's some hard bottom, whether that's rock, maybe a transition from mud to sand, any sort of bottom transition with grass in the area, or just bigger holes in the grass are basically what you're looking for. As far as Lake Spavinaw goes, usually it's just trying to find those holes in the grass, and then there's going to be brim and things spawning in them, and you just fish them with a wacky rig worm, swim jigs, topwater, stuff like that. Now, as we get further into the fall, these fish are going to start to transition from being further out here in these deeper areas into these little cuts or small drains, like super subtle drains. You can see here, this drain cuts in and it's a 1 foot depth change. And it doesn't look like this dramatic depth change like we were seeing on Table Rock or on Lake Hudson, but that's enough of a little drain for these fish to get in. And what you'll find is that the majority of these fish are going to be in a small, little tiny zone in here that maybe is the size of your boat, maybe 2 boat lengths, and you'll find a huge grouping of fish. Now, I've had days on Lake Spavinaw in October and September as well, where I basically fish this entire grassy edge. I'll put my boat in like 4 foot of water, and I'll follow the 4 foot contour line all the way through here, all the way through here, and all of a sudden I'll get like right here, and I'll catch 20 fish right here. I don't know why they're there specifically, because the next year I come back and they're not there, they're over here. Or they're over here. But I just basically get in here and I throw baits like a chatterbait, lipless crankbait if the grass isn't super thick, or topwaters if I feel like I can get them to come up on it. Swim jigs, again, maybe I need to slow down and just drag a worm or something through the grass. It kind of depends on the day from a bait selection standpoint, but I'll basically just get in that like 4 foot contour zone, follow this around, and you're going to find little patches. And usually what I'll find is, especially as you get into like September, October time, I'll find like 2 patches in here that are really good, and I can rotate them. I'll go to this patch, catch 3 or 4 fish. Come back to this patch, catch 3 or 4 fish. Go back to this one, let it rest, catch more fish. And I could try to fish the entire rest of this deal and maybe catch like a couple fish a day. But if I'm in that one little zone right here or like right here, you can catch them all day long. Just hop in between the two, though it may take you 3 or 4 hours to find those key stretches at the beginning of the day. Also, if you get bit in an area and catch like a small like 1 pounder or whatever, it's real small, usually there's more fish there. And I've had so many times on this lake in particular and other grass lakes when I grew up in Wisconsin, or any grass lakes I fish, where you catch a 1 pounder here at 10 o'clock in the morning, come back at 2, and you'll catch 20 fish and your best 5 will weigh 20 pounds. I don't know why those other big fish weren't eating at 10 o'clock and you can only get the little one to bite, but it happens all the time. So don't get discouraged if you get a bite in an area and it's small. Always drop a waypoint in those areas and come back, because you can always, or oftentimes, not always, but you can oftentimes come back and get some really good bites. So those are 3 completely different lake types, guys, that we're dealing with. Again, Lake Spavinaw is more of a natural-ish type lake with grass. We have the river system type lake that could be a great complement to guys on the Tennessee River, also guys who fish like the Arkansas River or other river systems across the country. And then Table Rock is a great representation of those Highland reservoirs, which is going to work on lakes like, Bull Shoals, Beaver Lake, if you're on Lake Washita, all these different places. So I tried to give you a good idea of all the different lakes and stuff. If you do want to check out any of these maps, you can go to the Lowrance CMAP Chart Explorer. This is what I'm using right now. So it's pretty cool. The Navionics web app, for whatever reason, isn't really worked out well anymore, so now I'm using the CMAP one. It's actually pretty nice. So if you guys do want to check out another map explorer, this one's pretty good. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Let me know if you enjoyed this concept or this style of video. I want to try to do a bunch of different stuff on Bass Fishing Declassified for you guys in terms of talking about baits and areas and techniques and everything. So let me know if this video appeals to you, and if it does, I'll try to do more of these in the future. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.